They didn't think it would matter. Humans were still considered too young, too primitive, too limited in scope to warrant caution. The Graal hegemony had cataloged humanity as a death world species. Yes, but that classification was brushed off. In their arrogance, the Graal believed death worlds produce hardy creatures, not dangerous ones, and most certainly not dangerous females. Their mistake was universal. The Graal considered other species women ornamental or utilitarian, biological vessels passive, predictable. It had been a profitable operation for generations. Select specimens from the outer colonies, quietly extracted and placed into bio-integrated facilities. No resistance. No significant diplomatic repercussions. No retaliation. Until they took the humans. The operation had been coordinated across 3 Terran colonies and Earth itself. Using stealth fielding tech and biosignature jammers, Graal recovery teams abducted 37 women. Civilian targets. No blood. No noise, no traces. The mission was deemed successful before the first containment transport returned to Sector Vyrek. Within hours, the humans noticed. The first reports were dismissed by local planetary authorities. Missing persons, maybe local crime. Then the pattern emerged. 37, all female, no common demographic aside from being of Earth descent, all vanished within a 12-hour window. It took Earth 2 hours to confirm the pattern. It took 20 minutes more for Terran Command to classify the incident as an interstellar act of aggression. After that, Earth went silent. The women were transported to Graal processing centers across their outer territories. Surveillance reports showed early resistance, but it was minimal. The women weren't screaming or begging. They were silent, watching, listening. A few guards found them unnerving, but said nothing. They weren't used to being studied by their captives. The first incident was written off as an accident. One of the women, a colonist from EOS 4, apparently slipped free from her restraints and shattered a Graal handler's jaw with a broken fragment of meal tray plastic. He died of blood loss. Another suffered multiple puncture wounds from what was later identified as a sharpened comb handle. No alarms had been triggered. By day 3, internal security flagged human females as high risk, not for aggression, but for disruption. They weren't protesting. They were memorizing corridors. They weren't asking questions. They were mapping the security systems. Their behavior didn't fit any known captivity pattern. The Graal, use of docility, decided to isolate them. That decision made things worse. Solitary confinement became communications hubs. The women established signaling patterns using light reflections, vibration through walls, time taps. Security AI flagged it as background noise. 2 more guards went missing, then 4, then 12. Each death different, each body left precisely where it would be found. A message. The Graal command aboard the station initiated bioelectric compliance fields. They underestimated the women's adaptability. None of the women were military. But they didn't need to be. They were biologists, engineers, linguists, pilots, survivors, and they were from Earth. That mattered. The Graal failed to understand the nature of Earth's selective pressure. Death world wasn't classification. It was a crucible. On Earth, everything killed. Cold, heat, predators, bacteria, viruses. Humans didn't just endure it. They evolved to outweed it. They didn't need strength. They had creativity, and fury, and memory. In Sector Vyrek, surveillance began to fail. Internal monitoring systems showed rooms with no occupants, only to discover humans had found dead angles and blind zones. Communications lagged. Equipment glitched. Maintenance systems reported unsolvable errors. But the women had no tools, no weapons, no access. That was the problem. They didn't need them. The woman from EOS 4 orchestrated the first coordinated mutiny. Using simple kinetic vibration, she triggered the fire suppression floodgate early, drenching an entire wing of the containment facility. 5 Graal drowned. 2 more died from pressure lock failure. The humans escaped that wing unnoticed. Across the Graal facility, human behavior became erratic, unpredictable, coordinated, and devastating. The Graal refused to believe they were capable of such action. Their culture couldn't fathom that civilians, non-combatants, would launch war behind locked doors without arms, armor, or allies. Meanwhile, Earth remained silent. There were no threats, no ultimatums, no diplomatic outreach. Just absence. Human diplomatic envoys stopped attending galactic meetings. Interstellar trade channels flickered dark. A handful of Terran colonies entered blackout status. The silence grew louder. Neighboring species, long aware of the Terran capacity for escalation, started asking questions. If this had happened to them, if their people had been stolen, humans would have moved heaven and hell to find them. But this time, there was no movement, no demands, only stillness. That's what scared them. Inside the Graal's primary genetic integration center, something worse was happening. The humans had begun to reverse engineer Graal biotechnology. Using memorized patterns, they bypassed neurorestriction protocols by training their own synaptic rhythms to mimic command inputs. They were reprogramming the prison, without access to code, without instruction. One of the women initiated a biological feedback loop in the environmental control system, using nothing but spliced nutrient compounds. The resulting chain reaction reduced half the station to atmospheric ash in under 20 seconds. The Graal counted 37 escaped humans. Not one body was left behind. When the Graal High Command met in response, they considered it a localized anomaly. Their conclusion: it was impossible for untrained primitives to compromise a fully locked, high-security genetic facility. They assumed there had been internal sabotage by a rival species. 3 days later, their fourth outer sector station went offline. Still, Earth said nothing. In an effort to reassure their allies and control narrative fallout, the Graal published a private memo across their network. Terran activity null. Human retaliation probability negligible. They even reclassified humanity's threat index as reactive defensive. That same day, the moon of Svalos cracked in two. There was no blast, no energy signature, no impact event. Surveillance recorded a silent ripple of gravitational distortion, followed by structural collapse. The entire Graal colony vanished. 36,000 dead. No one claimed responsibility. No warning. No survivors. One of the surviving women later admitted it was their doing. Not Earth. Not any fleet. Just them. She said, "We didn't need help. We just needed time." The women weren't trying to escape anymore. They were hunting. From within the empire that had stolen them, they found the codes, the command structures, the key personnel. One by one, they began pulling it all apart. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was surgical. By day 17, for Graal governors had vanished from secured residences. The only trace left behind were etchings, crude, simple letters carved into their walls. In Terran English, "Return them." The Graal had built an empire on exploitation. Their strength had always been rooted in control, not conquest. They were strategists, manipulators, experts in maintaining dominance through bureaucracy, fear, and precision. The abduction of the human women was supposed to be routine, efficient, profitable. Instead, it revealed a truth they had never accounted for. Humans did not fight like others. They did not rebel with the obvious tools. They shattered systems from the inside. The captured women were not prisoners. They were catalysts. The women's actions destabilized over 47 Graal facilities in under 2 standard weeks. They left no blueprints. They coordinated without communications. Each act of sabotage seemed random, yet every one struck a pressure point. Backup systems failed. Emergency plans collapsed. Hierarchies disintegrated. Graal analysts labeled it impossible. They insisted it was the work of hidden fleets or infiltrators. The truth was simpler. It was the work of women who refused to be broken. For the first time in Graal history, internal collapse outpaced external threat. Sectors began to fracture. Mid-level commanders issued conflicting orders. Surveillance infrastructure melted into static. Civilian broadcast channels began airing fragments of intercepted human phrases. "We are not your prey. We are the storm." They tried to recover control. They failed. The humans had studied them too well. Every Graal contingency assumed overwhelming force would be enough. They hadn't prepared for disassembly. And the women weren't fighting them. They were erasing them. When the women discovered how to bypass Grawl biometric access, using nothing more than heartbeat synchronization patterns, it broke the illusion of technological superiority. Guards stopped reporting to duty. Commanders sealed off their own wings. Some abandoned their posts. The women didn't need to kill them. Fear did that for them. One of the abductees, later identified as a linguistic software architect, rewrote a Grawl command AI's language protocols using graffiti patterns carved into her cell wall. The AI collapsed into recursive silence, unable to process instructions in its own corrupted dialect. 3 command centers failed because of that one act. It wasn't rage. It was logic. Cold, quiet, lethal logic. The surviving Grawl started issuing emergency alerts to other powers in the galaxy. None responded. Not one civilization offered assistance. Even longtime allies cut off diplomatic relays. Not because they didn't care, but because they were watching, waiting, studying what humanity would do next. Those who had once mocked the Terran emphasis on individualism now understood the risk. The humans didn't retaliate as a species. They retaliated as individuals, scattered, spontaneous, unbound by hierarchy, unpredictable in pattern. When you attacked a human, you weren't facing a nation. You were inviting 7 billion minds to contemplate your extinction. Inside the Grawl Defense Council, dissent broke into open rebellion. Some argued for total surrender. Others called for extermination strikes against human colonies, believing swift violence could force Earth's hand. The motion never passed. The last time they'd authorized an orbital burn against a Terran outpost, the retaliation had taken less than 5 hours and hadn't used a single weapon. A planetary weather control satellite in the Grawl system of Tavrik had experienced a spontaneous orbital decay. The satellite fell, igniting a storm cell that lasted 17 days, causing the collapse of 6 agricultural regions. A Terran tech signature was later found embedded in its code, untraceable, elegant, and signed with a single line, "We are awake." The captured women weren't hiding. They moved openly now through the understructure of the Empire. Wherever they went, systems failed. Structures collapsed. Alliances broke. One woman reprogrammed the prison security drones to believe their command officers were unauthorized organics. 17 Grawl personnel were medically disassembled in under 90 seconds. Another modified an atmospheric scrubber to expel airborne nanotoxins that targeted Grawl-specific neurotransmitters. The station was quarantined for months. By the time a recovery crew arrived, the only surviving life forms were Terran. They weren't armed. They weren't trained. But they were human, and that was enough. The women found allies, not among governments, but among the oppressed. Slaves, laborers, indentured workers from dozens of species began assisting them, passing messages, offering shelter, mimicking their tactics. The rebellion had no flag, no formal leadership. It spread because it was necessary. The Grawl couldn't stop it. Their culture wasn't built to understand asymmetric retaliation. They saw war as a contest of strength. The humans redefined it as inevitability. In their desperation, the Grawl offered to return the women. Quietly, privately, they reached out through anonymous channels to offer safe passage home. In return, they wanted Earth silence. No war, no exposure, just a reset. Earth declined to respond, but the women answered. They refused a return. In a rare intercepted transmission, one of the women explained why. "We're not coming home yet. Not until they understand. Not until every stolen voice is heard." The message was broadcast in 12 languages, each one from a species the Grawl had victimized. Within a week, multiple slave sectors rose up in coordinated strikes. Data caches leaked. Genetic archives were destroyed. Supply chains collapsed. The Grawl economy didn't just shrink, it imploded. Entire planetary networks fell into isolation. Communications routed through Terran satellites without permission. Former allies demanded answers. Grawl credibility fell below survivability thresholds. Even pirate syndicates cut ties, citing unsustainable risk. Every path the Grawl took to recover power was met with silence or sabotage. Their own AI systems refused to trust their inputs. Resource ships disappeared. Orbital relays went dark. Reports from the outer colonies described strange anomalies. Vessels that move without propulsion. Silent figures in Terran suits disabling weapon arrays with gestures. Grawl children began to tell ghost stories about the softfoot humans. They weren't myths. They were the women. Each of the 37 had taken a region of the Empire and made it their crucible. They were cleansing it, not just for revenge, but for correction. They uncovered archives of biological trafficking going back centuries. They exposed not only the Grawl's crimes, but those of their partners. And they transmitted everything. They didn't ask for judgment. They imposed it. The effect was nuclear. Societies that had quietly profited from the Grawl network now faced civil unrest. Publics demanded explanation. Protests turned into revolutions. Councils collapsed. And still, Earth remained passive. They didn't send fleets. They didn't send agents. Because they didn't have to. The women weren't only a response. They were a weapon system Grawl had built themselves. Out of arrogance, ignorance, and error, they had kidnapped Fury and handed it the keys to their kingdom. Inside the last surviving Grawl High Command installation, desperation turned to madness. They tried to flee. They tried to hide. Some began performing ancient rituals of supplication, convinced they had offended Terran gods. Others began purging their records, hoping to erase the evidence. None of it worked. Galactic stability had always rested on a fragile balance, an unspoken understanding between powers that survival depended more on perception than truth. For centuries, the Grawl had shaped that perception through dominance, coercion, and the quiet, profitable suffering of those beneath them. That era was over. Not by war, not by fleet engagement, but by the irreversible collapse triggered by the abduction of 37 human women. The galaxy watched as the Grawl shattered. But what followed was not the return of order. What came next was the reckoning. Where once there had been silence from Earth, now came whispers of consequence. Not threats, not ultimatums, just patterns, movement, influence, signals buried in systems previously considered secure. Entire civilizations began reviewing their own practices, not out of morality, but out of fear that they, too, might be seen. The fall of the Grawl wasn't viewed as a tragedy. It was seen as proof that humans, when provoked, did not respond proportionally. They responded absolutely. 37 women had dismantled a species-wide infrastructure with no army, no starships, no central coordination. Every surviving intelligence agency recalculated their threat assessments, and none of them liked the result. Traditional metrics of military power became obsolete. Fleet size meant nothing if the enemy could disrupt your AI consensus just by whispering a phrase in the right dialect. Humanity had never announced itself as a superpower. It didn't need to. The galaxy had crowned it one out of necessity. Yet Earth remained quiet. The Terran governments denied involvement. They offered no assistance. They neither claimed victory nor expressed blame. They simply continued, unbothered, unthreatened. And in that silence, another question emerged. What the women had only been the beginning. New reports surfaced from distant sectors. Stations reporting system failures following visits from unidentified Terrans. Not military units. Civilians. Scientists. Students. Tourists. Yet after they left, defense systems failed audits. Governance AI flagged internal corruption. Hidden exploit networks went public. No trace remained of the visitors except a phrase. We noticed. Panic spread faster than policy. Former allies of the Grawl scrambled to erase evidence of collaboration. Others launched preemptive inquiries into their own labor practices, terrified that humans would uncover them first. The fear wasn't of invasion. It was of exposure. The myth of human restraint had evaporated. A syndicate operating on the fringe of Zarnik space tried to reclaim a human orphan, claiming breach of genetic property rights. The retrieval ship vanished. The next day, every Zarnik trade node began broadcasting the child's DNA sequence as a symbol of protected identity under the newly coined Human Sovereignty Protocol. No one had issued the law. No one admitted enforcing it. But every node complied. Humanity had never asked for authority. It simply made ignoring it unwise. The Central Archive of Species Affairs attempted to place sanctions on Earth, citing disproportionate cultural influence and destabilizing behavioral models. 3 weeks later, their linguistic core crashed under a recursive translation feedback loop. Recovery failed. All records of proposed sanction were gone, and in its place, a new charter line appeared. Any system capable of recording truth should first be capable of surviving it. No one admitted adding it. The change was adopted without debate. It wasn't revenge that drove this new era. It was realization, a collective understanding that humans had been underestimated not in capability, but in threshold. Other species measured responses by survival. Humans measured them by completion. Once they were pushed past tolerance, they didn't just respond. They remade the terms of existence. Several empires disbanded internal intelligence agencies to avoid attracting scrutiny. Others attempted cultural reform. The Caltheran Republic issued public apologies for centuries-old offenses against minor Terran settlements. Earth didn't respond. The silence left them even more unsettled. The new fear wasn't human violence. It was of human awareness, that somewhere, unnoticed, a human might be watching, judging, calculating, and that if they moved, it would already be too late to stop them. It became known as the Watcher phenomenon. Socio-political theorists developed models around Terran response cycles, tried to understand what triggered human intervention, but none could identify a consistent pattern. That was the point. The humans didn't act in predictable timelines or by diplomatic code. They responded to something else, something that couldn't be modeled: conscience. They didn't broadcast their power because they didn't need validation. They didn't act for domination. They acted because someone had to, and once they decided to, there was no version of reality where they would stop halfway. The shattered remnants of the Graal tried to rebuild. They reached out for aid from old allies. None responded. Their name had become radioactive. Associating with them invited scrutiny, and scrutiny meant risk. The Graal began eating themselves. Betrayals, assassinations, splinter states. It wasn't rebellion. It was rot. On one isolated world, a Graal warlord captured one of the human women. He broadcast a restraint as a declaration of regained power. The stream lasted 41 seconds. In that time, 7 orbital satellites reoriented without permission. The planet's weather control grid inverted, generating a pressure vacuum that collapsed 3 command towers. The warlord choked to death on live air during the stream. His last breath wasn't taken. It was denied. The woman walked out of the compound unopposed. By then, every species understood. The humans hadn't waged war. They had issued a correction. Earth's cultural exports skyrocketed, not because of propaganda, but because everyone wanted to understand how a civilization could raise minds like those women. Music, literature, even archived social media logs became objects of study. Not to mock, but to learn. Empires built on hierarchy couldn't grasp how individuals, seemingly ordinary, could cause collapse. And yet it happened. Terran psychology courses became standard in several interspecies academies, not for manipulation, but for self-preservation. Diplomats trained for decades just to interact with humans without provoking misunderstanding. A single careless word could mark a species for extinction, not through bombs, but through a shift in priority. The phrase "they've noticed us" became synonymous with imminent doom. Human-led initiatives began spreading, quietly, anonymously. Habitat repair teams arrived before disaster struck. Failing governments found their corruption logs leaked to the public. Refugees from collapsing states were given new homes and systems where the administrator AI had suspiciously perfect human-accented syntax. Earth denied involvement every time, but everyone knew. And then came the pact. Not an alliance, not a treaty. A single sentence transmitted from a secure Terran beacon to all known systems. Do no harm to those who cannot fight back. No list, no enforcement clause, no demands. But it worked. Pirate operations ceased. Slavery markets disappeared in a single galactic rotation. Illegal mining systems went dark. Those who resisted vanished, and not one Terran ship had to move.